Right, Connor, before we move on talk about Israel, I want to mention Venezuela real quick because this is tied, I think, pretty closely to Iran now. The U.S. policy against Iran and Venezuela is pretty similar. At the end of the day, it's really a regime change policy in both cases. I guess with Iran, the pretext of the sanctions is the nuclear issue, but in both cases there's a maximum pressure campaign started by Trump. Biden left it on inexplicably, and now we have Iran shipping concentrate, our condensate to Venezuela. And this is apparently a chemical that can be used by Venezuela to dilute their heavy crude oil enough that they could pump more of it. And, this shipment came in February of 2022, but Venezuela, with the shipments of this chemical from Iran during 2021, was actually able to double their daily sale of oil to 900 barrels per day in December. And so, quite significant that Venezuela has been able to do this with the help of Iran. And I think it goes to show a couple of things. One, I've been talking about for a very long time, like going back almost 4 or 5 years now on this show, that if you sanction every country, they're going to find a way to do business with each other. And as much as the U.S. like trying to be the pirates of the high seas and everything like that and steal all these Iranian ships that are going to Venezuela, practically I think it's actually kind of difficult to do. And so the ships are making it there, and the Venezuelan government is able to generate some funds, which are desperately needed by the people. Estimates are tens of thousands, if not more now, have died from the U.S. maximum pressure campaign in Venezuela. Of course, the number for Iran is also tens of thousands. And so these countries are finding a way to do business. There's no really shaking among the Maduro regime, or I shouldn't call it regime, the Maduro administration, or the Supreme Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran. These two countries are these governments are very firmly in place within their people, despite the U.S. maximum pressure campaigns. And in part, it seems that, it's the mutual cooperation between the two governments, which I only imagine will continue to get stronger in the future. And also, if the U.S. keeps up its economic warfares against countries like Cuba, Russia, Syria, and China, I expect them to more thoroughly join in with these kind of trading agreements. I'm sure China maybe is a country that benefits off of this chemical making it from Iran to Venezuela because, of course, China buys Venezuelan oil. Want to mention that the U.S., as a part of their sanctions campaign in Venezuela, bats this guy, Juan Guaido, who is just some guy who claimed power in Venezuela. He was the head of the opposition Congress in 2019. He, is like an elected representative of the country, and it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison to say that this would be like Venezuela recognizing Nancy Pelosi as president of the United States. That's kind of what happened here. Although, Guaido have far less legitimacy and like name recognition than Pelosi would in the United States. I think it would be more like, whoever your congressman is. For most people, nobody outside your district really knows who your congressman is. Maybe if your congressman's AOC, Pelosi, or someone like that, they do. But generally speaking, people aren't too familiar with congressmen. And that was reflected with Guaido. They didn't know who he was. When he declared himself to be president, backed by the United States, members of the Venezuelan opposition walked off the stage because they didn't even support it. So this isn't a guy with a lot of support or anything like that. But the Biden administration continues to back his fraud and his claim to the throne of Venezuela, and that he should be ruling that country, even though it doesn't seem that he's generating any more support or there would be any reason for the United States to continue to support this. One last story on Venezuela. Back about 2 years ago on the show, maybe a year and a half, it might have been an episode of Foreign Policy Focus, myself and Will Porter covered this plot by this company Silver Corp and its leader Justin Guaido, and it became known as Venezuela's Bay of Pigs because this guy sent a couple of dozen of soldiers from Colombia to Venezuela to overthrow the Venezuelan government. They landed by raft and were immediately arrested, including two Americans. And And by the way, if you're looking in the news in the next couple of days, you're likely going to see a statement from a former Marine, I believe, who was a part of that, who claims he was tortured by the Venezuelan government. Now, I'm it's wrong if you torture anybody, but just remember that this guy's goal was to carry out a coup of the Venezuelan government. And so if, they did pick him up and not treat him very well, or, made threats that do amount to torture, nobody should be extremely surprised that the Venezuelan government was doing that. But we now have a Venezuelan general who was indicted for attempting, or in some kind of conspiracy with Maduro, although he is anti-Maduro, but the U.S. indicted him in a conspiracy with the Venezuelan president Maduro for a drug conspiracy. Now that he's been arrested, he's saying that the U.S. government had full knowledge of the U.S. plot by Justin Guaido against the Venezuelan government. And so it could just be something that somebody desperate is saying, Connor, but at the time, me and Will speculate there was a lot of evidence to suggest that the U.S. was at the very least aware of it, if not on board with this plot, and this is just another piece of that puzzle and something to keep our eyes on, because it's not only this guy who's now surfacing in the news, strangely, it's the stories of, again, the Americans who were detained by the Venezuelans and what they experienced. And all the articles I'm reading on the Americans and their experience in Venezuela really do not emphasize the fact that they were there to carry out a coup against the government. They were there for a violent overthrow of the Maduro government. And that's a pretty serious crime to commit. Now, again, doesn't justify torturing them, but that is something that you have to put on there if you're just trying to say, like, oh, well, the Venezuelan government tortured this American they just picked up on the streets. That's not exactly what happened.